I am curious what you believe this does to a potential ceasefire deal. You spoke with my colleague last week after Benny Gantz's resignation, and you said there are still a lot of loose ends. Mainly, you're concerned about Hezbollah in the north. What are those loose ends? What about a ceasefire deal? What are you looking out for next?
Sure. I mean, well, the ceasefire deal that's on the table is Biden's deal that he proposed. The Israelis have been lukewarm about it from the beginning. Biden says that it was done with the acquiescence or the agreement of the Israelis. The message out of Israel is that they're still deeply uncomfortable with what's been proposed. Biden, nonetheless, took this to the UN and really tried to enshrine this through the international system. And, the biggest impediment right now to this deal, even though the Israelis are deeply concerned, is that Hamas has not agreed to it. And we continue to see rejectionism on the part of Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, as well as some of the political figures that are based in places like Qatar or Turkey that are also involved in Hamas decision making. And so I think Hamas remains the biggest impediment to a deal being implemented in Gaza. The Israelis, I think, would like to make a deal that brings back more hostages in exchange for a halt in hostilities, not a permanent end to the war, but let's say a few weeks or even maybe a few months if it means getting those Israeli citizens back. That has been on the table ever since. But really, I'd say that the complexity right now is really, in my mind, it's the northern border. Hezbollah has carried out a very large number of attacks, thousands of different missile and drone attacks, some attempted incursions. We've seen a number of soldiers killed and civilians injured and killed inside of Israel. They've burned a lot of arable land. Hezbollah has done this. And really the volume has picked up significantly. And so the Israelis have responded in kind. This, I should note, has been happening since October 8th. The Hezbollah just began firing upon Israel one day after Hamas carried out its attacks, and this has been a constant ever since. I am deeply concerned about this element of the war. I actually don't see these as two separate wars. As I mentioned before, these are both proxies of Iran, funded, armed, and trained by Iran. And really what it looks like is just an escalation, a broader escalation on the part of the Islamic Republic to squeeze Israel now from two sides. And after two sides, we might see three or four. We know that they all exist. We know that they're armed. We know that they're trained and they're ready to fight. So the question is, how far does Iran take this? I still believe this is a multi-front war that is being waged against Israel, not some isolated thing that's been happening in the Gaza Strip.
So let's say there is a ceasefire deal that is eventually agreed to between Hamas and Israel. Does that automatically stop Hezbollah from attacking on the north end?
No, not at all. I mean, it's possible. One scenario is that if the war ends in Gaza in some shape or form, or a ceasefire is implemented, it's actually quite possible that Hezbollah continues to fire. But there's another part of this too, which is, and people are generally not aware of this, that somewhere around 150,000 Israelis have been evacuated from their homes in the northern communities along that border with Lebanon. Roughly the same number have been evacuated from southern Lebanon. They've been forced to flee as well. What we're looking at here is kind of a no man's land that is cleared out as a result of this war. I don't know about Lebanon, but I can tell you that the Israelis are not willing to cede that ground. And they believe that either we're going to have to see Hezbollah agree to a UN Security Council resolution dating back to 2006. That's UN Security Council Resolution 1701, demanding that all forces, all non-state forces, specifically Hezbollah, retreat north of what's known as the Litani River, which runs east-west across the country about 10 miles north of the border. This needs to be implemented for Israeli citizens to go home, because right now Hezbollah is deployed all across the south with a massive missile and drone threat. They have 200,000 rockets at their disposal, Hezbollah does, with some very advanced weapons, some very scary things that I think the world will soon learn about. This is not sustainable for the Israelis. And so even if a deal is cut on the return of hostages and maybe a pause in fighting or an even end to a fighting, we are still looking at a potential war that, in my view, and I said this last week with your colleague, this could be the most devastating war the Middle East has ever seen. This is the world's most powerful non-state actor, the most powerful terrorist group. They are equal in strength to the average European military, with, as I mentioned, 200,000 rockets. That would be a brutal war with Israel. And so this is what we're looking at right now, amidst the Gaza war and amidst these discussions about what happens next.